going through this episode, it's been true the last several episodes too. More and more the Season 4 being condensed thing is becoming obvious. Because what we have here is a lot of A-plot, B-plot stuff, and both of the plots don't really have much to do with each other. They're both strong plots. You know, the B-plot is the fate of Centauri and Narn, the A-plot is the struggle against the Vorlons and the Shadows. But these two plots have basically been doing this whole time, and you can kind of tell that if this was allowed to be elongated, basically you'd have one episode dealing with one plot, and then probably another episode dealing with the other plot, and so you could see how events are corresponding. I don't mind this format, and I think the biggest reason the A-plot, B-plot thing doesn't bother me here is because both plots are strong and kind of stand on their own. It's basically like condensing two good episodes into one. And again, it helps with that pacing. It makes it feel like events are just racing along as we go through Season 4. I mean, we're up to Episode 5 now, and we're already... I mean, Cartagia is gone. He's actually was only on screen for 5 episodes, despite being such a major villain and someone who is so horrific in so many different ways. He's actually been involved since... I forget the exact episode, but for all of Season 3 at the very least. It's just, we haven't even seen him. But then again, President Clark hasn't exactly had a lot of on-screen appearances either. It's interesting to me how many of the main villains of this show don't have a lot of screen time. Bester is probably one of the ones that gets the most, but I digress. So... one of the things I like here is that what happens is Sheridan has to rope together the League of Non-Aligned Worlds in order to unify against the Vorlons and the Shadows. Note that once again his overall plan is to use tactics against them, which is again interesting because the Vorlons don't use tactics. The Shadows do, but they use pretty specific tactics. And he has to manipulate the situation such that he at least has a chance. And the indication, by all accounts, is that he doesn't. All of this feels like it's building towards a season-ending climax, and I'll talk about that more next episode. But one of the things I find funny is that he has unified a lot of people against an external threat, and there's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about this is the biggest fleet in history, or at least known history. This is the biggest unified force. These people were actually fighting each other like just a few weeks or months ago. This is such a big event that's happening, right? They emphasize that over and over. I make that point because that's actually foreshadowing. I don't think this is giving away anything, really, but I just want it in the back of your mind. If you unify against a big external threat, what happens if you succeed? Like, Garibaldi actually calls this out flat out. I'm scared of winning and I'm scared of losing. Losing means we're dead. Winning means, now what? And that is a big question given how devastating this war has been. So then Ivanova gives a story about how her mother committed suicide while she was right next door. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That's just the bluntness. They do a good job of it. It's a very well-presented scene. And I hate to point this out again, but there is some amazing chemistry between the two actors in that scene. And I actually can't even imagine what that would do to the mindset of a person. I actually have not had to deal with suicide from anybody I know, any friends or family members in my life. Bizarrely enough, with one notable exception, but that was a bipolar issue. Not actually suicidal. So, I can't even imagine what that would be like to be a young girl and just, yeah. And her comments, don't tell me to wait if you don't mean it. Now, what I love about that is Sheridan's response is immediate and almost calm. Of course, I promise. Just bam. Doesn't even hesitate. Because he does intend to allow her to be there. And by the way, I mentioned the ideal, the military ideal last episode. Ivanova also adheres to that military ideal, very clearly and demonstrably. If there is a battle for the future, for people, she wants to be there, and she wants to be fighting in it. Keeping in mind that that's not a ignorant statement, because some people are like, yes, glory and glorious conquest and great fights in the battle, we shall charge to the end, yeah! That's a perspective of ignorance. Ivanova is career military. She knows just how ugly and how bad battle is. And she knows the stakes, and she knows it's likely she won't survive it. So she has a different perspective. Yes, I will lay down my life on the line to make sure that this might happen. Military ideal. Love it. I also noticed something. I've been noticing this in the past few episodes, and I wanted to discuss it here, because there's this great bit where Sheridan basically says, "You've been an awesome friend to Ivanova." And it's a nice touch, because it's very human. I think one of the reasons I like Sheridan so much, especially when he's portrayed in a particular light, is because he is an extremely human character. Very flawed. Very emotional. He has his quarrels, his nitpicks, not nitpicks, his fallacies in his perspective. There's a word for that, and I can't think of it all of a sudden. Foibles? Is that what I'm thinking of? But it's not like he's irritating or frustrating. It's just he's human. He's flawed. He is very down to earth. And the way he doesn't even know how to tell someone, I value your friendship. You are a good friend to me. I like that. It's a nice touch. And I think that's one of the reasons why he and Delenn have been doing better in recent times on screen. So then there's Lanier, who they've got to inject at least a little bit of humor into this episode. Although they actually inject some with both Lanier and Veer, ironically enough. But Lanier has to have his little, oh God, everyone. No, we know where they're attacking, by the way. And it's a nice touch. Not many shows will go from comic relief to, by the way, we know exactly where the fleets are going to hit each other. Where the doom of our age shall be decided. So Sheridan once again reverts to tactics, harrying, or harassment in this case. Basically, you may have an overwhelming force that you can't defeat, but you can do a lot to that force that doesn't involve defeating it. And in his case, he wants them to be stalled. He wants to delay them. So rush in, distract them, irritate them, frustrate them, get the hell out. Don't waste your lives. Again, he even makes that very clear. Do not try to destroy your targets. Don't even put that on the priority list. You are there to piss them off and to slow them down. Nothing more. Before we go any further, I want to talk about the Death Cloud. Very apropos for the Shadows. The Vorlons use something that blow up a planet. The Shadows use something that envelops a planet, drills and digs into it with these missiles, burrowing through it until they explode, thousands of missiles exploding many miles in the crust all at once. Yeah, that's going to do a lot to a planet. Releasing a lot of geothermic energy, which rejuvenates the cloud, and then they can move on. Much more Shadow than Vorlon. Now, the other interesting thing about the Death Cloud is it was actually a concept invented by Harlan Ellison, which I just feel like mentioning because, as I've pointed out before, Harlan Ellison actually had a fair amount of influence in Babylon 5 and the occasional input, like the Death Cloud. So they need to do something about this. So he's talking to Bryan Cranston. I know, right? He has more hair than I remember. He's talking to Bryan Cranston, who actually does a pretty good job of the role, which is no surprise because Bryan Cranston's a good actor. And then what I love is how much Sheridan struggles. He doesn't falter, but he struggles. This is something that's been talked about in many works of fiction. Star Trek has even brought this up many times. I've brought this up with regards to Star Trek. One of the most difficult things you must be prepared to do as a commander is to order your troops to their deaths in order to accomplish something. Because Garibaldi gave a speech to Jakar about that just last season. Sheridan has to order Cranston and his men to their deaths. He knows this. And it kills him. It just tears him up. He can barely even bring himself to get to fully talk about it outright, like he's ashamed of it. And what I find amusing is Cranston has to be the one to then comfort him and basically say, "Sir, they know what they signed up for, and so did I." This is not throwing men's lives away. This is a very calculated, very precise, strategic maneuver that requires the sacrifice of men. That is what a commander has to be. And that's why I hope to God I never have to do that. I'm not sure I could. I mean, intellectually, sure, you divorce yourself from the situation, and yeah, this has to happen. But in reality, speaking to a person, ordering them to their deaths, knowing you're ordering to them deaths, them knowing that you're ordering them to their deaths. And then when their distress call is going out, the one he has no intention of answering, he forces himself to listen to it as a form of penance and of guilt. He forces himself to carry the weight of the dead. Let's shift over to the B plot. So, they've got the conspiracy. It's become more and more clear that more than just two Centauri have a brain, and there's more than just the two working on this conspiracy. That's good. That should be. It makes sense, and it also helps to explain how the two of them, especially Londo, has been accomplishing so much thus far. I like how Veer is the one who basically reins in the little conspiracy council by pointing out, by the way, however bad or horrible this is, it doesn't matter. The Vorlons are coming. We have a deadline. And Londo flat out says, this is stupid and dumb, but we have a deadline. We have to do this. And they all agree, and it's like, okay, fine. Nice touch, by the way. Brilliant. I don't very often comment about the behind-the-scenes aspect of Babylon 5, because most of it's either obvious or I've already talked about it over on Voyager, and I don't like to repeat myself in my show. But they do something kind of clever with the set. It's actually the exact same set as the Emperor's throne room that they've been using for the last several episodes, so it saves on money. But they actually have already laid the seeds for this, way back when Rifa was talking about it. He actually mentions, yeah, it's a perfect copy of the throne room back home, so it's the same set. And they actually changed the tinting out the window because of the different atmosphere of Narn Prime. So it actually fits quite well. Very, very clever. I like that. Moving on. There's this great scene. Cartasia... I actually have to rewind a minute, because I have to talk about something that will help to explain this, because I feel like a lot of modern people, regardless, don't understand the negative stigma of the concept of Kingslayer. I actually had to sit and just talk about this in my Witcher 2 rumination, because in the modern perspective, that's not really a thing. I mean, for example, if you killed X leader of X country, that's a big deal. But if X leader of X country is a deranged psychopathic maniac, then most people would just be like, yeah, okay, they need to go, right? That's because we've kind of slowly, culturally and societally evolved over the last several centuries to really reach that point. But once upon a time, we here on Earth had the same anti-Kingslayer mentality. In other words, you just don't do that. You just don't. You don't go after the head of the beast, so to speak. And the reason why is actually, well, there's actually a lot of reasons why. And I don't want to get into the full cultural and geopolitical reasonings behind ensuring that the kings or emperors were basically above the law. Let's not get fully into that. That's a whole topic. The relevant point is that if you do that, you weaken the overall structure of the entire building. What I mean by that is pretend a government is a building, and you knock out a very major support column. Doesn't matter if that support column was rotten or had ticks or termites or whatever. If you still knocked out a support column, the structure starts to lean or tilt, or may actually fall over as a result. Now, there's a lot of other reasons for this, too, and again, I don't want to get into the topic fully, but the point is, it's very clear that amongst the Centauri Republic, they very clearly still have the anti-Kingslayer mindset. You just don't kill the Emperor. Even Veer had that mentality until a certain incident. And so everyone isn't just against... I mean, it's funny because everyone agrees. This guy has to die. Cartasia is horrible. But you don't kill an Emperor. That's just not done. I believe they have a quote. I forget where it is. It's in one of the last 5 episodes because I've been going through these all this week. But one of them flat out says, this hasn't happened in like 400 years. We just don't do this anymore. And what's funny is, for all their talk about how it must be done and how their arguments how it must be done, Veer, who does it, even unintentionally, is absolutely destroyed by it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, having explained this untouchable nature of the Emperorness, we have Cartagia, who is openly talking about Centauri Prime burning to the ground in front of his court. He's not even hiding it. No one questions him. No one second guesses him. How could they? He's Emperor. You're not supposed to do that, right? And then there's an interesting scene where the court jester starts mocking him, in a very minor way, I might add. It's not like overt, bad mocking. It's such a minor thing, I had to rewind the episode because I didn't catch what he was doing to mock him. It was so minor. Everyone in the court freezes. People visibly tremble in fear. Then he's like, oh, ha, 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 and starts dancing with him. Then Londo goes, talks to Jakar, lays out the final points of the plan. What's interesting about that is the conversation is very telling of both characters and how they have become at this point. Do note, by the way, at this point it's been... you can actually calculate it out, but it's been days since Jakar has properly been taken care of, or eaten, or anything like that. He is weakened and starved. He's probably had water at this point because he's still alive, but, you know. And, oh yeah, he's been tortured. Oh, and they took his eye on top of all that. Londo lays out the plan. And one of the things I like most is Londo flat out says, do not touch him. Don't touch him. We have to do that. You do that, it's going to make everything worse. We do that, we can supplant him. That's very important because it speaks to the fact that this is a very political matter. An immensely complicated political matter. Reasonings, rights, intents, causes, justifications, all of that matters within this arena. And Jakar knows that. He understands that. But what I find most interesting about the conversation is that Jakar, though he agrees, of course, says, your heart is empty, Malari. And Londo's response is to not deny it, to not even acknowledge it, to immediately move forward and say, this must be done or you will be dead. Keep that in the back of your mind. Then he leaves, and the court jester has been killed. Basically on a whim. One of the things I've noticed is I actually have a feeling that they told the actor playing Cartagia, again, he does a good job of it, to dial it up a bit, to be a little bit more wacky is actually the word I'd use. Not crazy. Crazy is a little different. Most people actually don't know how to portray or write crazy. But he portrays wacky. It's funny to me how difference there can be in humorous opinion, don't you think? That kind of a thing, right? And then there's this great scene. Again, another humor scene with Veer and Londo. And I like it because it's so obvious how desperate the two of them are for a laugh. For anything to distract them from just how absolutely terrible things have got. Things have gotten very dark. And I think that the scene with Lanier and the scene with Veer is both very important for us, too. Because the last several episodes, even before this season started, have been very, very dark. And so we needed that just kind of... Just enough for a breather, just enough for a quick recovery, and then we go right back into darkness. As much as it's a cliche, I love the fact that Jakar still breaks the chains. Because it is a thematic point. That's why it happens. It's one of those things that probably wouldn't happen in real life, but by God, this man's will is so unbending, so unyielding, that despite the torture, despite the starvation, despite the weakness, despite the giant freaking heavy wooden thing he's got on him, that when he throws it onto one of the fresh, rested, strong Centauri, they just buckle under it, that he still manages to break the chains. I like that. Very Jakar, actually. And so, of course, Cartagia, in a moment of true panic, it's the first time he ever looks scared, ever, actually. He's like, oh God. And he goes with his trusted advisor, because of course he trusts his advisor. And then he starts ranting about how he has to just frickin' kill everyone. And then, basically by accident, Veer kills him. Now, I say basically. For me, I think Veer would be bothered by this, even if he hadn't done the deed. There was, because this is one of those weird circumstances. Conspiracy to kill existed. Veer was on board with that, knowingly and willingly. The act of killing, debatable because it was clearly an accident, so that can be shuffled aside. So, but does deliberate conspiracy to kill coincide with intent to kill? It's a weird thing, and it goes back to that whole concept of distancing yourself from an act. It is easier to order someone to kill someone than it is to kill someone. The closer you are to the individual, the more difficult it is as a sentient and sapient being to commit the act. It's one of the reasons why something like what Cartagia was doing is so goddamn horrifying. And of course, someone like Veer, who has a fairly innocent, naive, and frankly good heart, would be so affected by it. What I find interesting is that there is a threat of succession war, and I have a weird feeling that might have been a plot point that was fleshed out in the original, when this was supposed to be 2 seasons, not 1 script. But that is brushed over almost immediately for the surprisingly sane reason that we can't afford a succession crisis right now. Vorlons are right there, Shadows are right there, and we got troubles now. We need a leader now, and that is surprisingly intelligent for politicians. What I find funny, though, for all his manipulating, for all his scheming, for all his power, for all his knowledge of the court, Londo never expected to be put on the throne. He didn't want to be put on the throne. And it's funny, isn't it? Because G'Kar didn't want to be put on the throne either, did he? But before we get to G'Kar, I don't want to parallel that really quick. So Londo is legitimately surprised when they say, yeah, you're prime minister. All in favor? Yep, okay, go. Okay. It happens before he can even properly protest. Poor Veer. Poor Veer. What I like is that Londo tells him, the intellectual, this had to be done. This horrible act had to be done. Note the parallels, by the way, between Sheridan. Sheridan had to order his men to their deaths. This was a very careful, very strategic move for the betterment of many people, including civilians. Had to happen. Doesn't like it. Hates it. Same thing with Veer. Even Londo. This had to happen. You had to murder a man in order to save many. And he gives this beautiful speech. There's no music. It's very quiet. It's basically just Londo monologuing because Veer's drunk. And he says all his regrets. He's so open to Veer about his past and about how he feels. And he admits, without meaning to, that G'Kar was right. He doesn't say it outright. But, he says, you still have a good heart. You still have a heart. I envy that of you. And then what's interesting is the next thing that happens is the fireworks start going off. Despite all that he has said, I think Londo does still have a heart. There was no true benefit to him, politically or for his people, to go ahead and release Narn. But he did it. He did it because he gave his word. That's interesting to me. And the timing of it, that can't be on accident. And then Veer has a great quote. I've actually asked this quote before of many excellent fictional works. What was it all for? Lots and lots of people dead or destroyed or worse. For what? And that brings us to G'Kar. Oh, God, I love the G'Kar scene. I always do. But this is a really, really good one. It's so obvious why they need G'Kar so badly, especially now. They're all celebrating, tearing down the room. Yeah, yeah, we defeated the Centauri. No, you didn't. We need the strength to defeat the Centauri. What? You literally just were let go by your superior encroaching invaders who had been eugenically cleansing you, among other horrific acts. And you're already thinking about, yeah, let's start the cycle again. And Jakar is the only one who is sufficiently outside that cycle through his experience to be like, no! No! We need to rebuild! We have our own wounds! And there's this great line. He says, like, the Centauri, and Jakar just overwhelms him and says, are a lost people! He understands just how far gone the Centauri really are. Not just for what they did to him, but for what they've been doing to themselves, for what he saw in Londo as Londo came to talk to him. He understands how broken both people are. He refuses the dictatorship, again, refusing the throne. And then, and the back and forth is so brilliant. I could just play the scene right now, and it all plays out. I don't really need to analyze anything. But there is this fantastic part where the Narn says, what have we have been dying and suffering. What have you endured? And then Jakar just turns. And the guy wilts. The look, Andreas Katsoulas nails it. He gives him an absolutely scathing, withering look. And the guy just wilts before it. But what I find funny is that Jakar just starts laughing. Because the question on the face of it is so ridiculous. We know why, too. We have been with Jakar for all he has sacrificed. Even before this season began, even before he got captured. All he did back on Babylon 5, all that he sacrificed, swallowing his pride, consuming his riches and the riches of his people to try and have some chance of accomplishing something, working together with some Centauri and Vir in order to get people out, becoming captured, all the horrors and torments and tortures he received, literally being willing to sacrifice what he considers his spirit, his soul, because he screamed, remember? He submitted. He submitted for his people. He has given of himself body, mind, heart, and soul. And he dares ask what I have endured? How can you not laugh at that? He has endured more than the rest of them combined. And we've seen it every step of the way. I'm very, very interested to see how the next episode will conclude, because now we have to deal with the Vorlons and the Shadows. Yeah. See you next time, guys.